Some new climate rules adopted by the Securities and Exchange Commission are facing a number of challenges in court. We'll have the latest on the legal efforts seeking to block the policy from taking effect. Plus, the Environmental Protection Agency announces a ban on the remaining uses of asbestos. But some critics say the regulation doesn't go far enough. We'll explain. And spring has sprung, and so have the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. We'll tell you why this year's bloom is one for the record books. Hello and welcome to EarthX News, where we focus on sustainability, conservation, and the environment. I'm Christina Thompson. Let's get into some of the biggest headlines facing our planet. A federal appeals court lifted its temporary hold on some new climate rules from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's now being picked up again in court. The courts had previously placed an order temporarily blocking the SEC's recent climate disclosure policy. The judge's decision granting a request for an administrative stay on the rules came after two oil field service companies, Liberty Energy and Nomad Proppant Services, filed a lawsuit challenging them. The litigation from the oil companies is just one of several lawsuits that have been filed against the SEC's new climate rules. You might remember in early March, the financial agency voted to adopt a new set of rules requiring firms to report on their direct emissions and the emissions linked to their energy purchases. Companies would also be required to make public by next year their financial exposure to climate risks, including severe weather events like hurricanes and wildfires. The SEC said the temporary hold was unnecessary since the deadline for complying with the rule wouldn't require any disclosures before March 2026 at the earliest. Critics of the SEC's new policy, who argue the agency's regulations are overreaching, previously praised the court's ruling on the temporary hold. The U.S. EPA is taking steps to phase out America's use of asbestos. Now, this might surprise you, but it is still being used here. Federal environmental officials announced they finalized a ban and will also block the manufacturing and import of chrysotile asbestos in the country. Under the new policy, the EPA says it will allow businesses up to 12 years to transition away from using the toxic chemical, which has been linked to cancer, like lung cancer and mesothelioma. But despite supporters of the policy praising the move, some critics are calling attention to the potential impact the new rule could have on companies that use the chemical. To list some product examples, bulletproof vests and some car parts, and even the components used to purify drinking water. Other opponents say the rule doesn't go far enough since it only applies to chrysotile asbestos, which is the only known type of asbestos still used in the U.S., though 5 other types of asbestos exist. Joining us now to discuss our former Chief of Staff at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Mandy Gunasekara, and President and co-founder of the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization, Linda Reinstein. Thank you both for coming on. Can you tell us a little bit more about this specific type of asbestos? It seems like it's used in a lot of products, even though there's quite a few hazards surrounding it. Linda, I'll go to you first.
Sure. So there are 6 fiber types of asbestos, and chrysotile is the most commonly mined fiber in Russia, Canada, and Brazil. The other 5 fiber types have really been phased out because they're considered amphibles and even more carcinogenic.
Linda, this is the only type of asbestos that's known to still be used in the United States. I know you mentioned some of the types that have been phased out. Why exactly were those phased out so much faster than this one has been?
Well, I think the fact that chrysotile is heavily mined has been the focus, and the EPA Part 1 is 1 fiber in 6 conditions of use, and that's where the Lautenberg bill first started to prioritize asbestos. I think it's really important when we talk about asbestos to recognize that every public health organization, from the WHO, CDC, our own government, etc., they all confirm asbestos is a known carcinogen, and we don't differentiate between fiber types. We just know it's a carcinogen, and there is no safe level of use.
Mandy, more than 50 other countries, they've already phased this out. Why has this type taken so long to begin phasing out in the United States?
Well, that's a really good question. It's a testament a bit to our state of environmental regulations. For better or worse, there's always a lot of litigation and opportunities for various groups to challenge. As you rightfully pointed out in the beginning, people on both sides of the equation, ones that want stronger regulations and those who want more time to comply, everyone is a little upset. And typically, if everyone's a little bit upset, that means you struck the right balance. But getting the right balance can take a lot of time, and it can be complicated by lingering litigation that takes its time to work through the various court systems, and then whether that's procedural or whether it's technical. And then when you get into the point of implementation, which we're looking down that pathway as well, there's another slew of litigation that's possible along those lines. So it takes a long time because of these relative checks that have been put in place in the United States environmental policy approach.
Mandy, just a follow up to that, because you did just touch on my next question. This final ruling now tells companies you've got 12 years to phase this out. Is that a long time for companies to have?
Well, it depends on what's the replacement. In some of these applications, there are alternatives, but I was actually talking to someone who's a very specialized expert in this area a couple days ago, and they said that one of the alternatives to asbestos use in certain industrial applications is PFAS. We're not talking about PFAS right now, but all your viewers need to know that's another chemical that EPA has been working on a comprehensive plan to get out of the general public and to better manage its use and application, and then control it from getting into the environment. So it depends on the application. 12 years sounds like a long time, but it depends on the state and evolution of technology to actually replace, because the uses are very important. You laid out some. There's also a lot in medical applications. Clean drinking water is one of the most important. So we don't want to, by virtue of setting timelines, create unintended consequences by taking away something that's actually vital to what's produced at the end of it is quite good, like clean drinking water or sterilized medical equipment and so on.
Right. Linda, same question to you. That 12-year phase out, is that a long time?
Well, it is a long time because we have to think about the imports and the transition and the workers and communities that could be impacted. But again, we're looking at 12 years, a balanced approach. And we know that the chlor-alkali industry, that is the main industry that imported hundreds of tons of raw asbestos to be transitioning. In fact, Olin Corporation has 5 years to transition, and they appear to be going forward with that plan. So only one company is looking to use 12 years to transition. And of course, drinking water is important, but it's also important to know that the major industrial uses of chlorine and caustic soda are for industrial purposes like PVC piping, and only about 5 or 7% of that industrial chlorine and caustic soda is used for drinking water. So we know the corporations can transition.
Ladies, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time in this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abandoned oil and gas wells may create a challenge to carbon storage projects in the U.S. According to a recent study from the Center for Applied Environmental Science, the deserted wells pose a weak spot in carbon sequestration. The research comes as energy companies have applied for scores of permits seeking to pump the climate pollutant underground through a process that injects the greenhouse gas into porous rock formations. Scientists say the formations are usually filled with brine containing high salt levels, heavy metals, hydrocarbons, and radioactive elements. Brine leaks can be even more worrying than just the escape of CO2. Scientists who study underground carbon dioxide storage say the risk of large-scale leaks is low, but some environmentalists are skeptical, including the director of the watchdog group behind the study, who said, quote, "It's not a question of whether they're going to leak, it's a question of how much, how often, and whether it's an acceptable level of leakage." In addition to the growing concerns about potential leaks of brine and CO2, the EPA also estimates the abandoned oil wells release about 300,000 metric tons of methane every year. Sheep may soon graze under solar panels in one of Wyoming's first agrivoltaic projects. Agrivoltaics is using land for both agriculture and high-tech solar. Bright Night Energy Company proposed installing more than 1 million solar panels, a battery storage facility, and transmission lines on almost 5,000 acres of private land. The sun tracking panels will be built several feet off the ground, leaving enough room for the rancher's sheep to continue grazing beneath, and can enhance grazing conditions since the shade provided by the panels helps prevent heat stress in plants. And for the sheep, this could make solar projects more land efficient and more acceptable in states with significant ranching activities. One study found that sheep grazing by solar panels resulted in 38% less vegetation, but the quality of available plants increased, offsetting the reduction. Even with less food available for grazing, the sheep gained the same amount of weight. And as a bonus, the sheep preferred grazing in the shaded areas over areas not covered by solar panels. The cherry blossoms in America's capital made an early arrival this year. The National Park Service announced the iconic trees in Washington, D.C. reached their peak bloom on March 17th. That's the second earliest on record, with the first happening on the same date 24 years ago. The parks have been tracking records for over a century, and they tell us that temperatures at the tidal basin, where the Washington blooms are most vibrant, have risen steadily at a rate of 1.1 degrees Celsius per century from 1895 to 2017. The blooms come on the heels of the world's warmest Januaries in more than a century, according to a recent report from NOAA. And according to the National Phenology Network Spring Leaf Out report, the appearance of tiny leaves that signal the start of spring arrived 24 days early for places like Washington, D.C. Park officials say the plant reaches its prime when 75% of the trees have blossoms on them, which happened about 5 days earlier than originally predicted. Just before the buds started to pop, park officials predicted peak bloom would occur closer to the end of March. Coming up, one form of energy is taking a dip, while other ways of generating electricity are on the rise in the U.S. Stay tuned, those details are just ahead. One U.S. lawmaker is touting America's energy policy and wishes that President Biden would do the same. In a recent op-ed, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who helped craft the Inflation Reduction Act, said, quote, "The United States is producing more oil, gas, and renewable energy than ever before. We are exporting more fossil fuel energy than we import. Our country has never been more energy independent than we are today." The quote continues with, "But it seems the president's advisors in the White House refuse to speak up about these accomplishments. I urge President Biden to join me in celebrating America's energy accomplishments." Manchin, who is from the country's second largest coal-producing state of West Virginia, based his comments on some recent statistics showing the country produced a record 4.7 billion barrels of crude oil, 38 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 238 million megawatt hours of solar last year. Manchin suggested America's record fossil fuel production would not have been possible without the Inflation Reduction Act. Conservatives and the fossil fuel industry say record production levels are despite President Biden's agenda, not because of it. While recent data suggests oil and natural gas production are up in the U.S., power from coal has dipped in the last year. According to federal energy officials, coal-fired power plants generated 16.2% of the country's electricity in 2023. That's a 3.5% drop from 19.7% the year before, and down about half from a decade ago. Joining us now to discuss is Dr. Melissa Lott, a professor at Columbia University's Climate School. Melissa, thank you for coming on. Can you tell me a little bit about what accounts for this drop in coal power, and what are some solutions to replace that power?
Yes, when we look at coal power in the United States, first off, coal is mainly used to produce electricity. And within that, we've seen other types of technologies and other fuels come online and be cheaper options. So when we look at this drop in coal, a lot of it is because of replacement by cheap natural gas. This goes back to us figuring out in the United States how to frack our gas, how to bring it out of the ground and have it be cheaper than other options. Also, cheap solar, cheap wind, cheap batteries, and other types of energy storage. These are all contributing to coal being used less. And so while coal still has a significant role in producing power, it's being replaced by these other things that just make more sense from an economic perspective and also are increasingly fitting into policy priorities and goals that different states and communities are setting. What we are also seeing is coal power being used differently. So you have a coal-fired power plant, maybe you keep it online to be backup when it gets really hot in the south in the summer or really cold in the north in the winter. But over the course of a year, that coal power plant might be used less overall. So we do expect to see a continued decline, at least in the United States. The global picture is a bit different.
So with the use of coal going down, we need to incorporate things like nuclear power. Is this going to be enough to power the United States?
Yes, we certainly have the resources. It's about getting the right mix, because at the end of the day, we need to keep prices low in homes. We already have 1 in 3 Americans who are energy insecure, so defined as either paying a huge amount of their income for their energy bills, and so they make trade-offs with food or medication or other things, really tough trade-offs, or they don't keep themselves safe in their homes. So it's really important that we keep our energy affordable, the electricity coming into our homes affordable. So if we want affordable, reliable, and clean electricity, we absolutely have the resources. It's about making sure that our policies and regulations are set up to incorporate all the different types of technologies we need to keep all of those things true: affordable, reliable, and clean power.
Is gas one of those that are plentiful and affordable?
So gas is one of those that has made its way into the mix because it has become so much more affordable. It is so much cheaper than when I started my work 20 years ago, and we were incorporating it in our models and our studies. Around it, it also provides flexibility into the system. The question is, what are our goals around the term clean? So if we want affordable, reliable, and clean, what does that mean for greenhouse gas emissions and their contributions to climate change? What does it mean for contributions to air pollution? Because natural gas does come with a lot of different types of air pollutants when we burn it in our power plants. And so it's certainly a solution we've incorporated now. The question is going to be, how are we either going to capture those emissions to clean up natural gas or replace it with other types of firm resources, flexible resources that can help us to make sure that our electricity stays reliable and affordable.
So in your expertise, what do you think will happen with natural gas? Do you think that this trend will continue going upwards, or will it maybe start to follow the suit of coal and decline in the future?
I mean, in the near term, it seems positioned to continue to expand. And so the question is, what are we doing as we get out of this decade and in the coming decades? And we have a number of states, when you look at the targets in New York and California, also some of the targets around renewables in things like my home state of Texas, where the question is, how big of a role will natural gas play compared to other things, and how quickly will we phase down the use of natural gas when it comes to power generation specifically?
Dr. Melissa Lott, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Hope you have a good day.
You as well. Coming up, climate talks get off to an early start in Denmark. Stay tuned. We'll have more on that story when we return. A group of climate leaders and ministers from around the world recently came together in Denmark for a round of early climate talks in an effort to chart a course for this year's Global Climate Summit, better known as COP29. Sarah Williamson has more.
World leaders tackling a world problem as climate leaders and ministers gather in Copenhagen, setting the stage for the United Nations Climate Change Conference. It's known as COP29. This year hosted by Azerbaijan in collaboration with Denmark and the UAE. The conference aims to build upon the achievements of COP28 held in Dubai and lay the groundwork for what to expect at COP29. The president of last year's summit, Sultan Al Jaber, stresses the need to turn these agreements into action.
While the UAE consensus made history, an agreement is only as good as its implementation. We must now take urgent action across the climate agenda.
And in order to turn those agreements into action, the conference puts finance at the forefront of development.
And this year, finance will lie at the heart of climate diplomacy. The negotiations of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance are an opportunity to set a new path, unlock funds, and rebuild trust between the parties.
Azerbaijan is set to host COP29 in November, and with oil and gas accounting for 91% of Azerbaijan's exports, its economy relies on these fossil fuels. Yet, the country is committed to expand green energy sources by 30% by 2030. COP29 serving as the deadline for a new finance goal to help developing nations. So, with this common goal and a like-minded delegation heading for the event, it is likely to accelerate global efforts towards a sustainable and resilient future. For EarthX, I'm Sarah Williamson.
Sarah Williamson, thank you. And before we leave you, the Prince of Wales is showing his support for the planet in London. Prince William spoke to a crowd at the EarthXtra Prize Launchpad. That's his new platform helping develop and make potential climate change solutions a reality. Prince William founded the EarthXtra Prize Environmental Award in 2020. Its 10-year mission is to find ways to protect and repair the environment with innovative solutions. And they're back. Conservationists in Kenya are celebrating after a critically endangered species was returned to a grassy plateau that hasn't seen them in decades. 21 black eastern rhinos are stepping into what officials call their rightful habitat for the first time in almost 50 years, thanks to the efforts of Kenya's Wildlife Service. In partnership with several private conservancies, successfully relocated the animals to a conservancy in the northern part of the country. Officials say the last time a black rhino was seen in the wild in this region was in the mid-1970s. Media reports say this species of rhino almost went extinct in Kenya in the 1980s after their numbers dwindled from 20,000 to just 300 because of illegal poaching. Officials estimate the country now has just over 1,000 black rhinos, and the government hopes to double that number over the next 13 years by 2037. That's it for this edition of EarthX News. Please join us again next week. I'm Christina Thompson.